The Zoraxian Bank fortress was a glistening bastard of architectural hypocrisy, hanging in the cosmos like a jewel no one could afford. It was guarded by aliens so paranoid they made conspiracy theorists look like optimists. Vex Ironheart stood at the helm of the human ship, the Irreverent, staring at the fortress on the display with an expression that said he wasn't just going to steal their lunch money, he was planning on eating their lunch too. The crew was a ragtag orchestra of humanity's finest malcontents. Vex liked it that way. Less potential traitors, more predictable potential backstabbers. "All right, you lot," Vex said, leaning on the console like it was a bar counter. "We've got a fortress, a pile of overconfident aliens, and a galactic reputation to ruin. Any thoughts?" Tara Mouth Lark, communications specialist and professional cynic, snorted. "Thoughts? Yeah, I thought this was a terrible idea the first time you pitched it. Still do, but here we are." "Why are we even doing this?" asked Axel, the pilot who had a penchant for flying like he was perpetually in a dogfight. "I mean, aside from the obvious we like shiny things part," Vex grinned, a flash of white in the dim cockpit. "Because deep down we all need to know if humans have souls." Mouth rolled her eyes. "How existential." "No, seriously," Vex continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "There's a bunch of alien philosophers debating our motives, and I intend to make this heist a definitive answer." "You mean you intend to piss them off so much they have no choice but to notice us?" piped up Finn, the tech genius who could make a toaster sing. "And here I thought we were doing it for the artifact." "Ah, the artifact." Vex waved a hand dismissively. "A mere bonus. The real prize is proving we're more than just spacefaring monkeys." Meanwhile, in the bowels of the fortress, a couple of Zoraxians were engaged in their own debate. "Do you think humans have souls?" asked Glax, who looked like a cross between a jellyfish and a politician. His counterpart, Zik, who could have been Glax's twin if it weren't for an extra tentacle, pondered. "I don't know, but they certainly have gall." "Gall might be their defining feature," Glax mused. "They do tend to annoy everyone they encounter." "True," Zik said. "But what about their motives?" "Motives?" Glax laughed, a sound like a blender full of marbles. "They have motives as clear as mud. They're mostly just unpredictable. You know, like a cat in a room full of laser pointers." Back on the Irreverent, Vex was outlining the plan with the precision of a man who knew improvisation was his best skill, but plans made him look responsible. "So, we sneak in through the cargo bay, because it's always the cargo bay, and make our way to the artifact." Mouth was busy tying her hair back into a ponytail that meant business. "And if we get caught, we improvise," Vex said, winking. "Besides, we're not going to get caught. That's what Finn's for." Finn looked up from his console, eyes wide with the kind of enthusiasm that only came from a healthy dose of caffeine and insanity. "I've got a little surprise for their security systems. Think of it as a digital love letter." "And what if they don't love you back?" Axel asked, flicking a switch that made the engines hum. "Then we find out if humans really have souls," Vex replied with a shrug. "Or at least if we have enough luck to make our ancestors proud." As the Irreverent approached the fortress, the crew fell into a tense silence, the calm before the storm. Everyone had their role to play, and with any luck, it wouldn't end with them as a cautionary tale in the galactic archives. "All right," Vex said, breaking the silence as the ship eased into the docking bay with all the grace of a drunk elephant. "Showtime." The cargo bay doors hissed open, and the crew slipped out like shadows. Vex led the way, his strides full of purpose and just a little swagger. "Remember," he whispered, "we're here to make a point. A point or a mess," Mouth muttered, sticking close as they moved through the dimly lit corridors. "What's the difference?" Vex shot back with a grin. Meanwhile, Zik and Glax were still discussing the finer points of humanity's soul. "You know," Zik said, "there's a theory that humans are just really enthusiastic about being obnoxious." "Perhaps," Glax replied, watching the security feeds with something bordering on amusement. "But their audacity is unparalleled." As if on cue, the Zoraxian security system flickered, and Finn's digital love letter took effect. Alarms blared and lights flashed, confusion reigning supreme. The crew of the Irreverent moved quickly, knowing full well that their margin for error was thinner than a politician's promise. "Here we go," Vex said, stopping in front of a heavily fortified door. "Finn, do your thing." Finn cracked his knuckles with theatrical flair, pulling out a device that looked like it belonged in a mad scientist's lab. "Give me a minute," he said, already halfway through bypassing the security. "A minute?" Axel asked, glancing nervously down the corridor. "Do we have a minute?" "We have as long as I say we do," Vex replied, crossing his arms. "Confidence," Mouth quipped, "or stupidity?" Vex smirked. "Always a bit of both." With a final flourish, Finn stepped back as the door hissed open. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the treasure room." Inside, the artifact sat on a pedestal, looking as unassuming as a paperweight and probably just as dangerous. "That's it?" Mouth asked, unimpressed. "Looks can be deceiving," Vex said, approaching the artifact with the reverence of a man who knew he was about to upset the balance of power. "Besides, it's not about how it looks. It's about what it means." "And what does it mean?" Axel asked, keeping an eye on the entrance. "It means," Vex said, carefully lifting the artifact, "that sometimes the smallest things have the biggest impact." "Or the biggest explosions," Mouth muttered. "Ready to make our exit?" Finn asked, packing up his gear. "Let's get out of here before they realize what's missing," Vex said, tucking the artifact under his arm. As they retraced their steps, the sound of Zoraxian guards echoed through the corridors, their shouts a reminder that this was far from over. "Think they'll let us leave quietly?" Axel asked, already knowing the answer. "Not a chance," Vex replied, leading the charge back to the ship. As they approached the docking bay, Zik and Glax were waiting, their expressions a mix of curiosity and disbelief. "Humans," Zik said, shaking his head, "always making things more complicated." "Isn't that what makes life interesting?" Vex replied, not slowing down. The guards moved to intercept, and Vex tossed the artifact to Finn. "Take it," he shouted. "Get back to the ship." The crew scattered, chaos erupting as blaster fire filled the air. Vex ducked and dodged, his movements a dance of calculated risk. "You think this is going to end well for you?" Glax shouted, his tentacles twitching with agitation. "Not well," Vex replied with a grin, "but definitely memorable." As the crew regrouped, the guards closing in, Vex gave one last look at the fortress. "Remember this day, folks," he said, "because it's the day we finally answered the question, do humans have souls? And what's the answer?" Mouth shouted over the din. Vex laughed, a sound full of defiance. "We have something better, guts." With that, the crew made their escape, leaving the Zoraxians with more questions than answers and a fortress full of embarrassed guards. The Irreverent roared to life, engines burning as they sped away into the void. Vex sat back in his chair, the artifact safe and sound. "All right, team," he said, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. "Let's see what kind of trouble we can get into next." The stars stretched before them, infinite possibilities waiting to be explored. Whatever lay ahead, one thing was certain. The galaxy would never forget the day humans proved they had more than just souls, they had audacity. The Irreverent clung to the shadows of space like a cockroach in a greasy kitchen, its crew preparing for a job that had all the chances of a snowball in a supernova. Vex Ironheart, with his usual swagger, paced around the command deck, eyes fixed on the holographic display of the Zoraxian Bank Fortress like a chess player eyeing a particularly smug opponent. This fortress was the crown jewel of Zoraxian paranoia, a shimmering monstrosity that made Fort Knox look like a child's piggy bank. "Tara, how's our comms looking?" Vex asked, running a hand through his hair with the casualness of someone who knew his next move was to be decided by fate or folly. Tara Mouth Lark, ever the cynic, adjusted her earpiece, like a marriage counselor at a divorce court. "Ready for the worst." "Optimism, that's new from you," Vex shot back with a lopsided grin. "Don't get used to it," Mouth replied, her fingers flying over the controls with the practiced ease of someone who could make sarcasm a second language. Meanwhile, down in the belly of the beast, the Zoraxian philosophers were having a field day. Glax and Zik, their gelatinous forms shimmering under the fortress's sterile lights, were glued to the screens showing every camera angle of the intruding human pests. "Watch them," Glax said, his voice a quiver of curiosity. "They scuttle about like insects, yet carry themselves with misplaced confidence." "Humans and confidence," Zik replied, adjusting a tentacle with an air of disdain. "Two things that should never mix." As the irreverent crew slipped through the fortress's cargo bay, because naturally it had to be the cargo bay, Vex turned to Finn. "All right, techno-wizard, time to earn your keep." Finn, the tech genius who looked like he slept on a bed of circuit boards, grinned like a kid in a candy shop. "I've got a little something that'll make their systems purr like a kitten or scream like a banshee, depending on its mood." Axel, their pilot, who was always ready to fly like a bat out of hell, chimed in. "Just make sure there's no screaming." "I hate screaming." "Don't worry, this'll be smoother than an oil bath on a Sunday morning," Finn assured, pulling out a device that seemed more appropriate for a mad science fair than a heist. As Finn worked his magic, the fortress's security systems flickered, hiccuped, and finally gave up the ghost entirely. Alarms that were supposed to blare in response to intruders stayed silent, lights flickered in confusion, and cameras showed nothing but static. "Now that's what I call a digital lullaby," Finn said, stepping back and admiring his handiwork like a proud parent. "Nice," Vex nodded, leading the charge down the dimly lit corridor, the glow of emergency lights casting long shadows. "Let's move, people." Time's not on our side. Back in the fortress's control room, the philosophers watched the footage turn to static. Glax tapped a tentacle against the console, irritation creeping into his voice. "Typical humans. They're like a virus, always adapting." Zik, ever the skeptic, added, "This only proves their moral ambiguity." "A creature without a soul wouldn't understand the value of simplicity." "Simplicity?" Glax questioned. "Perhaps they see the world as a series of problems to solve, like a never-ending puzzle." "Or a game," Zik mused, a hint of intrigue in his tone. "A dangerous game." Vex and his crew advanced through the corridors, encountering surprisingly little resistance. The absence of guards was unsettling, like the calm before a storm. They arrived at a junction, the path ahead split like a serpent's tongue. "All right, Finn, which way to the artifact?" Vex asked, glancing at the branching paths with the same enthusiasm one might have for a tax audit. Finn consulted his handheld device, which beeped and whirred with software-induced glee. "Left, then straight. Should be a big shiny door at the end." "Shiny, huh?" Axel said, snickering. "You know, one of these days shiny's gonna get us killed." "Today's not that day," Vex said, ever the optimist of the pessimistic. "Now let's see about this artifact." As the crew moved forward, Mouth voiced what everyone was thinking. "If this artifact is some kind of ancient Zoraxian whoopee cushion, I'm going to be really pissed." Vex laughed, the sound echoing softly through the corridor. "If it is, we'll just have to sit on it and hope for the best." They reached the door, and true to Finn's prediction, it was indeed shiny, practically glowing with a self-importance that rivaled any treasure vault. Vex approached it with all the caution of a man about to defuse a bomb. "Finn, tell me this thing doesn't need a password," Vex said, eyeing the control panel. "No password," Finn replied, stepping forward. "Just a touch of genius." Finn's fingers danced across the panel, and moments later, the door slid open with a melodious chime, a sound that was either welcoming or the last note of a requiem. The artifact sat inside, basking in its own importance. It was a small, unassuming device, yet it carried the weight of 100 galactic legends. Vex picked it up carefully, looking at it with a mix of awe and suspicion. "This is it?" Mouth asked, peering over his shoulder. "I've seen more impressive paperweights." "Looks can be deceiving," Vex replied, slipping the artifact into his bag. "Remember, it's not about how it looks. It's about what it does." "And what exactly does it do?" Axel asked, ever the skeptic. "Depends on who you ask," Vex said with a shrug. "Some say it's a key to untold power. Others think it's a fancy paperweight. We're here to find out which." Meanwhile, back with the philosophers, Glax and Zik were watching the humans' antics with growing interest. "They're taking the artifact," Glax noted, his tone a mix of disdain and curiosity. "Let them," Zik replied, undeterred. "It will give us the evidence we need. Humans are impulsive, driven by curiosity but lacking wisdom. Or perhaps they seek understanding," Glax countered. "To steal is one thing, but to understand, that's a different matter. Understanding does not equate to a soul," Zik argued, his tentacles twitching with conviction. "It only proves they are an enigma, not a species of depth." "Perhaps," Glax mused, watching the humans escape with an almost admiring gaze. "But enigma or not, they have courage." "And recklessness," Zik added, a hint of admiration in his voice despite himself. As the crew made their way back to the Irreverent, the alarms finally found their voice, blaring throughout the fortress with a volume that suggested whoever designed them had a deep-seated hatred for eardrums. "Looks like they finally noticed us," Axel said, picking up the pace. "Nothing like being fashionably late to a party," Mouth quipped, keeping stride with Vex. "Let's make sure it's a short visit," Vex said, leading the way with the determination of someone refusing to be a footnote in history. They reached the docking bay, the path to freedom clear yet fraught with the potential for disaster. The Irreverent welcomed them with open doors, its engines humming with promise. As they boarded, the Zoraxian guards stormed into the bay, weapons at the ready. Vex turned, offering them a grin that was equal parts defiance and farewell. "Glad you all could make it," Vex called out, giving a mock salute. "But we really must be going." Blaster fire erupted, the sound competing with the alarms in a symphony of chaos. Vex dove into the ship, the doors closing behind him with the finality of a well-timed punchline. "Axel, get us out of here," Vex shouted, strapping into his seat. "On it," Axel replied, his hands a blur as he coaxed the ship to life. The Irreverent lurched forward, engines roaring as it tore away from the fortress, leaving the Zoraxian guards to stare at their vanishing prize with a mix of frustration and grudging respect. "Well, that was fun," Mouth said, collapsing into her chair with an exaggerated sigh. "Fun's one word for it," Vex replied, shaking his head with a grin. "Now let's see what this little trinket can do." Back in the fortress, Glax and Zik watched the humans escape with something approaching admiration. "They got away," Glax noted, his voice devoid of its earlier derision. "Naturally," Zik replied. "But they've left us with much to ponder. Their actions, though reckless, have a certain charm." "Charm?" Glax asked, incredulous. "You think they're charming?" "In their own way," Zik admitted. "Perhaps there's more to them than we thought." "Perhaps," Glax conceded, his gaze fixed on the empty space where the humans had been. "Or perhaps they simply defy understanding." "Either way," Zik said, "they have given us much to consider." As the Irreverent sped into the void, the crew settled into the familiar routine of victory laced with impending disaster. Vex held the artifact in his hands, wondering what secrets it held. "Here's to another successful heist," Vex said, raising an imaginary glass. "And to not dying," Finn added, his voice carrying the optimism of someone who had narrowly avoided disaster. Again, Mouth chuckled, leaning back in her chair. "Same time next week." "Wouldn't miss it for the world," Vex replied, feeling the weight of the artifact and the promise of endless possibilities. As they journeyed into the unknown, leaving a trail of questions and chaos in their wake, one thing was certain: the galaxy would never quite be the same, and neither would they. The Irreverent barreled through the void, an unwelcome guest in the Zoraxian Bank Fortress's airspace. Inside, Vex and his merry band of misfits were already elbow-deep in the next phase of their harebrained plan. The mission might have started smoother than a politician's promise, but anyone with half a brain knew it could only get worse from here. "All right, people," Vex barked over the comms, his voice cutting through the general chaos like a rusty blade. "Let's not get comfortable. Finn, keep an eye on that artifact. If it starts glowing or making weird noises, don't poke it." Finn gave a thumbs up, a gesture both reassuring and deeply worrying coming from someone who once thought it a good idea to test a homemade EMP in a crowded spaceport. "You got it, Chief. If it does anything funky, I'll be sure to do the exact opposite of what my instincts tell me." "That's what I like to hear," Vex muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Now, everyone ready for round two. Mouth, who had been idly fiddling with her comms unit, looked up with a smirk. "Ready as I'll ever be, which is not very, but let's not dwell on that." Axel, strapped into his pilot seat like a thrill-seeking lunatic at a galactic amusement park, chimed in. "I've got the ship primed for the getaway. Just try not to make it too exciting, yeah." Vex grinned despite himself. "No promises, but I'll do my best to limit the death-defying antics." Meanwhile, back at the command center of the fortress, Glax and Zik were seething like a pair of disgruntled scholars forced to watch a reality TV show marathon. Glax's tentacles fluttered with agitation as he observed the humans on the monitors, their activities barely distinguishable through the static. "These humans are unpredictable at best," Glax groused, his voice echoing through the sterile room. "Their actions defy logic." Zik, scanning the room with the detached disdain of someone who once wrote a paper on the futility of existence, nodded. "Indeed, they have an uncanny knack for surviving by the skin of their teeth." "It's quite infuriating." Glax watched as the crew navigated another corridor, their progress slowed by a series of intricate barriers that had sprung to life like a bad case of hives. "We should have anticipated their capacity for chaos," he mused, though whether he was speaking to Zik or to himself was anyone's guess. "Chaos is their natural state," Zik replied, with the kind of condescending self-assurance that only comes from years of studying oneself into a stupor. "They thrive on it. Observe how they turn every situation into a life-or-death scenario." Glax sighed, a sound like a deflating balloon. "Perhaps, but there's something almost admirable in their madness." "Admirable?" Zik's disbelief was nearly tangible. "They are a species of lunatics." "Lunatics with a peculiar resilience," Glax countered, watching the screens as the humans continued their reckless advance. Inside the fortress, Vex led his crew through the labyrinthine corridors, each step laced with the promise of imminent disaster. They came to an abrupt halt as the floor panels shifted beneath them, rearranging into an elaborate pattern that defied rational thought. "Well, this is new," Finn remarked, kneeling to inspect the odd mosaic of tiles that stretched ahead like a demented chessboard. "Looks like some kind of puzzle." Mouth squinted at the floor, her expression caught between confusion and amusement. "Oh, great, alien hopscotch, just what I needed in my life." "Any thoughts, Finn?" Vex asked, not bothering to hide his impatience. "Or should we start placing bets on who gets zapped first?" Finn scratched his head, contemplating the conundrum with the air of a man who had once hacked a vending machine for free drinks. "I'd wager it's a logic puzzle. Step on the wrong tile and we'll probably get a face full of something unpleasant." Axel, who'd been leaning against a wall, arms crossed, raised an eyebrow. "You're saying it's a guessing game?" "Not exactly," Finn replied, a mischievous twinkle in his eye. "I'm saying it's a game where the stakes are high and the rules are vague." "Perfect," Vex said with a dry smile. "Just like every other day in our charming lives." The crew huddled around Finn as he worked through the puzzle, their collective hope hanging by the thin thread of his expertise. After a tense moment of silence, Finn took a cautious step forward, the tile beneath his foot glowing a reassuring green. "Looks like we're in business," he said, more relieved than confident. "Follow my lead, and we might just make it out of this in one piece." One by one, the crew navigated the floor, each successful step accompanied by a chorus of relieved sighs. By some stroke of luck, or perhaps the universe's morbid sense of humor, they reached the end of the corridor unscathed. Back at the command center, Glax and Zik watched the humans' progress with a mix of frustration and grudging respect. "They've solved it," Glax observed, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I was certain they'd fail." Zik shook his head, exasperation evident in every exaggerated movement. It's infuriating. Every logical prediction suggests they should falter, yet they continue to defy expectations. Glax nodded, his tentacles curling thoughtfully. Perhaps it's their tenacity that defines them, more so than any philosophical argument about souls. Tenacity, Zik echoed, the word rolling off his tongue like a bitter pill. A crude trait, but effective. As the crew ventured deeper into the fortress, the defenses seemed to wake from their slumber with a vengeance. Automated turrets sprang from hidden alcoves, their targeting systems zeroing in on the intruders with lethal precision. "Down!" Vex shouted, his voice cutting through the sudden barrage of laser fire. The crew dove for cover, the walls around them sparking and sizzling as they absorbed the deadly onslaught. "Finn, any ideas?" Vex demanded, his voice barely audible over the clamor of battle. Finn peeked out from behind a console, squinting at the turrets with the keen eye of someone who had spent far too long dismantling electronics for fun. "I might be able to hack them, but it'll take a minute." "Well, you'd better make it quick," Axel grunted, returning fire with a blaster that looked like it had seen one too many fights. "We're not exactly swimming in time here." Mouth, crouched beside Vex, shot him a wry grin. "Just another day at the office, huh?" Vex snorted, his own blaster barking a reply to the turrets. "If this is what you call a day at the office, remind me to update my resume." As Finn worked his magic, the crew held their ground, each second stretching into an eternity. Finally, with a triumphant shout, Finn slammed a fist onto his makeshift control panel. The turrets powered down, their threat neutralized for the moment. "Got it," Finn crowed, wiping sweat from his brow. "We're clear." Vex nodded, his relief palpable. "Good work. Let's move before they send reinforcements." They pressed onward, each step bringing them closer to their objective and further into the depths of the fortress. It wasn't long before they found themselves standing before another door, this one sealed with an air of finality that would have made a lesser crew turn tail and run. "Finn, do your thing," Vex instructed, gesturing to the door's control panel. Finn obliged, his fingers dancing over the keys with practiced ease. The door slid open with a mechanical groan, revealing a chamber that glowed with an eerie, otherworldly light. Inside stood a pedestal, and atop it rested the second artifact they'd come for, a device that shimmered with an aura of mystery and potential danger. "Well, there it is," Mouth said, her voice tinged with equal parts awe and skepticism. "Let's hope it's worth the trouble." Vex approached the artifact, his expression a careful blend of curiosity and caution. Only one way to find out. He reached for the device, feeling its smooth surface beneath his fingers. As he lifted it from the pedestal, the room shuddered, the walls vibrating with an ominous hum. Guys," Axel's voice crackled over the comms, urgency evident in his tone. "We've got company, a lot of company." Vex's grip tightened around the artifact, his mind racing. "Time to go. Now." The crew beat a hasty retreat, their footsteps echoing through the corridors as the fortress came alive with the sound of pursuing guards. Back in the command center, Glax and Zik watched the unfolding chaos with mixed emotions. "They've done it again," Glax muttered, both impressed and exasperated. Zik nodded, his expression inscrutable. "Their reckless ingenuity is astounding, yet it continues to defy all logical explanation." "Perhaps it's their defining trait," Glax suggested, his tone contemplative. "A species driven by impulse, yet capable of remarkable feats." Zik remained silent, his gaze fixed on the monitors as the humans made their escape. There was something undeniably compelling about these strange, chaotic beings. As the crew raced back to the irreverent, the fortress's alarms blared with renewed intensity, urging them onward with the promise of impending doom. They reached the docking bay, their path blocked by a wall of armed guards. Vex exchanged a glance with his crew, their shared determination steeling them for the confrontation ahead. "All right," Vex said, his voice steady with resolve. "Let's show them what we're made of." With weapons at the ready, the crew charged forward, their actions a testament to the unpredictable nature of humanity. As they fought their way to the ship, the fortress behind them erupted into chaos, a fitting backdrop to the madness they left in their wake. The Irreverent's engines roared to life, propelling the ship away from the fortress and into the safety of the void beyond. Vex and his crew settled into their familiar roles, the thrill of victory tempered by the knowledge that they had once again danced on the edge of disaster. Back in the fortress, Glax and Zik watched the humans' departure with a mixture of respect and lingering questions. "They did it," Glax said quietly, unable to suppress a sense of admiration. "Indeed," Zik replied, his tone begrudgingly respectful. "Perhaps there is more to them than meets the eye." As the Irreverent sailed off into the unknown, the crew's laughter mingled with the hum of the ship, their spirits buoyed by another successful, if perilous, endeavor. And in the silence that followed, Glax and Zik contemplated the mystery that was humanity, a puzzle that defied explanation, yet captivated their imaginations nonetheless. The Irreverent hummed along like a disgruntled bee in search of a flower to sting, its engines purring with an almost dismissive defiance of the cosmos. Inside, the atmosphere was a mix of relief and anticipation, like a gambler who just barely managed to flee the casino with his shirt intact. Vex Ironheart leaned against a bulkhead, arms crossed and eyes narrowed at the holographic display flickering with a distorted representation of their next target, the innards of the Zoraxian Bank fortress. "All right, team," Vex announced, his voice as dry as the Martian desert. "We've tangoed with their defenses and lived to tell the tale. Now comes the tricky part. Those paranoid aliens have more layers than an onion dipped in bureaucracy." Mouth snorted from her perch by the comms panel, her chair tilted onto two legs in a flagrant defiance of gravity and good sense. "Just what I needed, more puzzles. I swear, these aliens have a fetish for traps. If only they'd channel that energy into something productive, like universal health care." Finn rubbed his temples, a haunted look in his eyes. "They've upgraded their security since the last time. It's like they finally realized we're not here to deliver a singing telegram." Axel, who was half buried under the helm console adjusting something that probably shouldn't have needed adjusting, piped up. "Or maybe they're just bored and decided to play tower defense with us as the creeps." Vex grinned wryly. "Either way, we're just getting started." Meanwhile, back in the command center of the fortress, Glax and Zik were embroiled in a philosophical tussle that was, frankly, giving the term mind-numbing a run for its money. Glax waved a tentacle at the holoscreens showing the humans' progress. "Admit it, Zik. These humans are like roaches, indestructible and annoyingly persistent." Zik's eyes narrowed, the philosophical musings practically leaking from his pores. "Persistence is not evidence of a soul. It is merely biological stubbornness." "Stubbornness," Glax countered, "that borders on genius. They've navigated two of our most complex systems with nothing more than sheer audacity and a distinct lack of self-preservation." Zik sighed, the weight of existential debate sagging his shoulders. "Perhaps, but it does not explain their lack of philosophical sophistication." In the Irreverent, Vex had Finn hooked up to a portable interface, a mess of wires and blinking lights that looked like a spaghetti monster's fever dream. Finn's fingers danced across the keyboard with the fluidity of a concert pianist who'd spent his career playing in dive bars. "What's the play, Finn?" Vex asked, leaning over Finn's shoulder like a particularly invested hawk. Finn's eyes flicked over the scrolling code, deciphering the alien language with practiced ease. "They've got a new algorithm running, a predictive one. It anticipates moves before we make them." "Looks like they're done playing nice." Vex chuckled, a sound as bitter as black coffee. Nice was never in their vocabulary. "So," Mouth interjected, "what do we do, besides panic, I mean?" "We adapt," Vex replied, his voice as solid as a steel beam in a storm. "And hope they're as bad at predicting as the last psychic I visited." Axel emerged from beneath the console, grease smudged across his cheek like war paint. "I've got the ship on standby. If things go sideways, we'll make a run for it. Again." Sounds like a plan, Mouth quipped, shrugging. And if all else fails, we can always try diplomacy. With our fists. The crew laughed, the sound tinged with the kind of fatalism that only came from staring down death and finding it lacking. Back in the Zoraxian command center, Glax found himself drawn into an increasingly heated debate with a gaggle of alien philosophers, each one more convinced than the last of humanity's rudimentary nature. As I was saying, Glax continued, his voice a placating murmur amidst the cacophony, humans possess an adaptability that defies conventional understanding. Zik crossed his arms, unimpressed. A primitive form of evolution, no different from a microbe adapting to a petri dish. Yet here they are, Glax retorted, dancing circles around our defenses. Perhaps primitive is too dismissive a term. The debate raged on, a whirlwind of words and conflicting ideologies, each side firmly entrenched in their respective beliefs. Back on the Irreverent, Finn had finally cracked the next layer of the bank fortress's defenses. "We're in," he announced, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. "I've got a route mapped out. It's risky, but it's our best shot." Vex studied the holographic display, nodding slowly. "All right, let's move. And remember, if anything glows or makes weird noises, don't poke it." Words to live by, Axel muttered, already securing his seat for the chaos that was sure to follow. The plan was simple. Get in, grab the artifact, and get out before the Zoraxians realized they'd been duped yet again. Simple, in the way that juggling chainsaws while blindfolded was simple. The crew was the picture of practiced efficiency, slipping into their roles with a collective ease that belied the tension simmering beneath the surface. As they approached the artifact room, the familiar hum of the fortress's energy systems enveloped them, a reminder that they were very much on borrowed time. The door to the chamber slid open with a sluggishness that suggested it had seen better days. Inside, the artifact gleamed with an ethereal light, a beacon of hope or possibly doom, hard to tell from this distance. Vex stepped forward, eyes locked on the prize. "All right, let's do this quick and clean." Mouth snorted, a wry smile playing on her lips. "When is it ever quick and clean?" Vex chuckled, his hand hovering over the artifact. "Always have to ruin the moment, don't you? Someone's gotta keep you grounded," Mouth replied, her gaze flicking to the door. "And speaking of grounded, we've got incoming." The sound of marching footsteps echoed through the corridor, a reminder that the Zoraxians were not the kind to give up easily, just like bad habits. "Time to go," Axel said, his voice a low rumble as he hefted his weapon. "We'll hold them off. Finn, see if you can lock down their systems again." Finn nodded, already tapping away at his portable console, his focus unyielding. "On it." Vex took a deep breath, steadying himself as he reached for the artifact. The room seemed to hold its breath in anticipation, a moment frozen in time. And then, with a deftness that bordered on the miraculous, Vex lifted the artifact from its pedestal. For a brief second, nothing happened. Then all hell broke loose. The room shuddered violently, alarms blaring as if the fortress itself was protesting this latest indignity. The walls lit up with warning lights, bathing everything in a blood-red glow. "We've overstayed our welcome," Vex growled, cradling the artifact as they bolted for the exit, the sound of approaching guards growing louder with each passing second. Back in the command center, Glax and Zik watched the chaos unfold with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "They've done it again," Glax murmured, his voice a blend of frustration and admiration. Zik shook his head, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. "I hate to admit it, but there might be more to these humans than we initially thought." As the crew raced through the corridors, the fortress's defenses continued to unravel, a testament to Finn's skill and the sheer stubbornness of the human spirit. They reached the docking bay just as the guards closed in, their weapons trained on the intruders with lethal intent. "Hold them off," Vex ordered, his voice a steady command in the maelstrom of chaos. Axel and Mouth took positions, their blasters offering up a relentless barrage of covering fire as Finn worked his magic on the docking bay controls. "Got it." Finn shouted, triumph lacing his words as the ship's systems came alive, welcoming them with the promise of escape. Vex and the others sprinted toward the Irreverent, the artifact clutched tightly in Vex's grip as the ship's engines roared to life. With a final defiant burst of speed, they clambered aboard, the ship's ramp closing with a resounding thud that drowned out the chaos outside. Axel punched the throttle, the ship leaping forward like a thing possessed, leaving the fortress and its bewildered guards in their wake. As they disappeared into the void, Vex allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, the artifact secure in his hands, and the prospect of yet another successful heist warming his cynical heart. In the command center, Glax and Zik watched the humans' departure, their expressions a complicated blend of admiration and curiosity. Perhaps, Glax mused, there is something to be learned from these humans after all. Zik nodded, a newfound respect in his gaze. Indeed, they are an enigma, a testament to the unpredictability and resilience of life. As the Irreverent sailed off into the unknown, the crew's laughter mingled with the hum of the ship, their spirits buoyed by another successful, if perilous, endeavor. Back on the Zoraxian homeworld, the philosophers were left with more questions than answers, their debate over humanity's place in the universe far from resolved. But for Vex and his crew, the only question that mattered was where they'd go next, and what chaos they'd unleash when they got there. The Irreverent hummed through the emptiness of space, engines purring like a very grumpy cat. Vex settled into the captain's chair, the artifact nestled securely in his lap. It had that faint glow that made one think of cheap neon signs at dive bars, if dive bars held the secrets of the universe. "All right," Vex said, "someone hand me a drink and tell me why this doesn't feel like a victory. Maybe because we've pissed off an entire species of paranoid aliens," Axel mused, leaning against the bulkhead. "Or maybe it's because their defenses were like an onion and we only just peeled the first layer." Mouth, spinning in her chair by the comms panel, snorted. "Or maybe it's that Finn's fiancée has better odds at the roulette wheel than we do at pulling off this kind of heist twice." Finn, eyes still scanning for incoming threats on his interface, shook his head. "I don't gamble. I leave that to you professionals." "Smart man," Mouth said with a wink. "It's not a gamble if you know you're going to lose." As the crew bantered, the ship shuddered violently. The holographic display flickered, revealing a swarm of Zoraxian ships dropping out of warp, surrounding them like cosmic vultures over a carcass. "Ah, hell," Vex muttered. "Looks like we got ourselves a welcoming committee." The ship's comms crackled to life, and an overlord of alien bureaucracy spilled out in a voice that was all harsh edges and condescension. "Humans aboard the Irreverent, surrender immediately." "You are outgunned and outmaneuvered. Resistance is futile," Axel chuckled darkly. "When's the last time that worked on anyone? Sounds like they took a page out of a bad sci-fi show." "Yeah, the one they canceled after one season," Mouth added, swinging her chair around. "So what's the play, Chief?" Vex sighed. "Well, it's been a good run. Let's go down swinging." Mouth grinned, a wolfish flash of teeth. "That's the spirit. Who needs plans when you have reckless abandon?" But even as they prepared for the inevitable, the ship jolted again, this time with an impact that made the walls groan in protest. An energy net wrapped around the Irreverent, dragging it reluctantly toward the Zoraxian command ship like a dog caught by animal control. "Looks like the end of the line," Finn said quietly, the haunted look in his eyes deepening. In the Zoraxian command center, Glax watched the humans capture with a mixture of relief and regret. "They are captured," he stated flatly, his voice echoing in the sterile room. Zik nodded, a shadow of triumph in his expression. "Their reckless nature confirms their lack of souls. Truly they are driven by impulse and chaos, not reasoned thought." "But," Glax hesitated, "there's something about their camaraderie." "It's not just blind impulse." Zik gave him a sidelong look. "You sound almost impressed." "Perhaps I am," Glax admitted. "For all their flaws, they possess a unity that is intriguing." "Oh, spare me your bleeding heart," Zik scoffed. "They are a danger to themselves and everyone else." "Nothing more." Glax turned back to the holoscreens, watching as the humans were led from their ship, shackled and decidedly worse for wear. We shall see. Inside the Zoraxian ship, the crew of the Irreverent found themselves thrust into a cell that was too small, too bright, and too indignantly smug in its sterility. "Well," Axel said, rubbing his wrists where the restraints had been, "this is cozy. Cozy like a coffin," Mouth muttered, flopping onto one of the narrow benches. "I hope they at least serve drinks." Vex leaned against the wall, the weight of the situation pressing down like the Martian desert sun. "Looks like we're finally caught." "I was beginning to think we'd make it out without ever facing the music." "Now what?" Finn asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Now," Vex replied, "we wait for them to decide our fate, and hope we made enough of an impression to make them think twice." The alien guards returned, leading them to a chamber that was part court, part theater. The Zoraxian philosophers were gathered in a semicircle, their postures a curious mix of curiosity and disdain. "Humans," the lead philosopher began, his voice carrying the weight of ancient wisdom and a healthy dose of arrogance. "You stand accused of theft, trespassing, and upsetting the natural order. How do you plead?" "Not guilty," Vex said with a shrug. On account of just being too damn cool, the philosophers exchanged glances, their expressions a tapestry of disbelief. "Such arrogance," the lead philosopher continued. "Is this your defense?" Vex grinned. "It's worked so far." Zik, standing off to the side, shook his head. "Reckless bravado, proof of their unsophisticated nature." But Glax leaned forward, tentacles steepled in a gesture of contemplation. "Perhaps it is more than bravado. They act as one, even when faced with insurmountable odds." "Or stupidity," Zik shot back. "There's a fine line between the two," Axel interjected. "And we walk it like a tightrope." The aliens resumed their debate, the humans standing awkwardly in the center of the room, more like specimens than defendants. "It's like being the main event at the zoo," Mouth whispered. "Smile and wave, boys." As the debate continued, it became clear that the philosophers were split. Some saw the humans as nothing more than reckless children, while others began to question the simplistic view of human nature that had prevailed for so long. "Even if they are reckless," Glax argued, "there is something to their persistence, a quality that might just surpass mere survival instinct." Zik sighed. "You wish to find nobility in chaos." "Perhaps," Glax replied. "Chaos has its own form of wisdom." "That's deep," Axel muttered. "I feel like we should be taking notes." Finally, the lead philosopher silenced the debate with a wave. "Enough. While we deliberate, the humans shall remain in confinement." As they were led away, Vex caught Glax's eye, a silent understanding passing between them. The humans had shown them something, even if they couldn't quite put it into words just yet. Back in their cell, the crew settled into an uneasy silence. "Well, that could have gone better," Mouth said finally, breaking the tension. "Could have gone worse," Axel pointed out. "We could be dead." "Always looking on the bright side, huh?" Vex said, a ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. "Someone has to," Axel shrugged. Finn looked at Vex, a question in his eyes. "Do you really think they might let us go?" Vex thought for a moment, weighing the odds. "They might, but don't bank on it." "And if they don't," Finn pressed. "Then we improvise," Vex said, his voice firm. "Because just like that fortress, this place has its weaknesses. Everything does." "Let's hope you're right," Mouth said, swinging her legs off the edge of the bench. "Otherwise, we're going to have a lot of time to contemplate our life choices." The Iors dragged on, each tick of the clock a reminder of their precarious situation. The crew dozed in shifts, the weight of uncertainty heavy as they waited for a decision that could change everything. Finally, the guards returned, leading them back to the chamber. The philosophers had reached a verdict, their expressions as unreadable as ever. "The humans," the lead philosopher announced, "have demonstrated qualities both admirable and dangerous. While we cannot condone their actions, we recognize the complexity of their nature." "What does that mean?" Mouth asked, voice dripping with sarcasm. "We get a participation trophy." "It means," Glax interjected, "that perhaps your actions warrant further study rather than immediate punishment." "So you're not going to execute us?" Axel asked, skepticism lacing his words. Not today, Glax replied. But understand, your freedom comes with conditions. You will be monitored, and should you stray again, the consequences will be severe. Mouth snorted. Sounds like probation with extra steps. As they were escorted back to their ship, Vex couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. They'd come close to the edge and survived. And perhaps even more importantly, they'd given the Zoraxians something to think about. Back on the Irreverent, the crew settled into their familiar routines, the tension of the past Iors slowly easing. So, Mouth said, leaning back in her chair, what's the plan now, fearless leader? Vex grinned, the warmth of victory still lingering like the aftertaste of whiskey. We keep doing what we do best. And what's that? Finn asked. Vex chuckled. Making trouble, of course. As the ship slipped back into the void, the crew's laughter mingled with the hum of the engines, a reminder that even in the darkest of Iors there was always light. You know, Axel mused, maybe there is something to that whole soul thing after all. Yeah, Vex agreed, watching the stars streak past. Or maybe we're just really good at being bad. Either way, they'd live to fight another day, and for now, that was enough. Vex Ironheart stood at the tiny viewport of their cell, staring out into the endless black. It felt like a bad joke, the universe, an uncaring void punctuated by distant stars, and here they were, a bunch of malcontents cribbed in a space cage. Fantastic. He rubbed his temples, feeling the pressure build like a bad Martian hangover. So, got any brilliant ideas, Chief? Axel asked, still leaning against the bulkhead like it was a bar he was propping up. Vex turned, a wry smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I was thinking we could just ask nicely to be let out. Mouth snorted. Yeah, right after we bake them a cake and invite him over for tea. Don't forget the finger sandwiches, Finn added, deadpanning from his spot on the floor where he was absently fiddling with a loose panel. Vex crossed his arms, eyes sharp. All jokes aside, we can't sit here waiting for them to decide if we're worth dissecting. We've got to outsmart these paranoid bastards. Paranoid or not, they're not stupid, Mouth pointed out. And they've got more layers of security than an onion dipped in red tape. True, Vex agreed, but everyone underestimates the human knack for chaos. We need to do what we do best, improvise and make them think twice about holding us. Axel chuckled. So, what's the plan? We start a prison riot with nothing but a toothpick and a piece of string. Something like that, Vex replied, a glint of mischief in his eyes. Remember, we're up against bureaucracy. While they're busy debating our moral fiber, we hit them from the inside. Mouth leaned forward, intrigued. You thinking what I'm thinking? Depends, Vex said. Are you thinking about how to turn this place's own security against it? Always. Mouth grinned. Vex gestured to the exposed panel Finn was working on. Think you can rig their systems to cause a little chaos, Finn? Finn nodded, focus sharpening. Sure, if I can figure out how their tech interfaces with Iors. It's all about finding the right loophole, Axel smirked. Looping